All right, that's it. You're done. That's
No, give me a thumbs down.
4. That was hard. What was that?
Coming up next on Rugby Wrap-Up, Major League Rugby Talk with James Kennedy of Rugby United New York. Rugby Wrap-Up brought to you in part by The Balanced Palate, nutrition for peak performance. And the Pig and Whistle on West 36th Street, the world's best rugby pub. Hey everybody, welcome back to Rugby Wrap-Up in Midtown Manhattan at the Fantasy Sports Network Studio 34 in New York City. I think I said that already, but we got a full house today. We have Mr. George Hook calling in from Ireland. We have Rugby United New York owner James Kennedy to my right. Yeah.
Hey Matt, how's it going?
Oh, hey James. I thought I was hearing stuff in the headphones.
See, I got a free hat.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah,
I see
free,
that.
Free jacks.
Free jacks.
Yeah,
it's interesting. And our newest guest, Mr. Simon Gillespie, straight from Donegal.
That's it. Thanks for having me on the show, Matt. Really appreciate it.
This is an exclusive, George. I don't know if you get exclusives over in Ireland, but we've got an exclusive event breaking here on Rugby Wrap-Up. He is one of the coaches on the coaching staff. All right, so guys, before we get started, James, I want to address your squad. Because
yes. You want to talk to my squad?
I want to address their act as a surprise. They're right there.
Hey guys,
they're with George in Dublin right now.
They're my kids. George, look after my kids.
Well, half the team is Irish, so they are with George. And George knows your uncle, by the way, Joe Kennedy.
Yeah.
George, you want to weigh in on that one?
Joe Kennedy.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting that his great-granddaddy made a fortune out of bootlegging, and Mr. Kennedy is now entering, without a shadow of a doubt, the quickest way to lose money known to the human species, which is owning a rugby club.
True that.
Yeah, my mother told me that if you wear a hat indoors, you've got 7 years bad luck. So I hope that's not an indication of Mr. Kennedy's tenure at Rugby New York. But I wish him well. I really wish him well. He's got testicles of steel.
I have testicles?
That's breaking news in itself.
I thought I gave those up in the divorce.
Pretty much. All right. So anyway, James, let's get to your team first of all.
I'm going to take the hat off now, George.
You've gotten in his head.
But I am going to put my shoes on the table.
So James,
Matt,
let's quick question for you.
Yeah.
You
ready?
had
what's the question, Matt?
Some changes in the league, some changes in your team.
Yeah, it's
changes across the board for pretty much everybody.
It's like
learning process. You guys have a complete changeover in your coaching staff for the most part.
Yes.
Right? For the folks at home, just briefly, 11-5 season, playoffs. You were an ice in the veins, Joe Peterson, impossible angle conversion kick from being in the finals. So for the folks at home, why the change?
I think the guys last year did a great job. The coaches did a great job, but it's how professional this has gotten, how quickly it's gotten professional. The players demand more. It's just jumped on so much so quickly, so we need coaches with more recent and relevant experience on man management and just kicking it on the next level. Nothing wrong with the coaches last year. Keys will do a great job in Seattle.
Are you getting a finder's fee because he's got cheaper rent, a pay raise, a better job?
I don't think he's got a pay raise.
Well,
listen, I know a little bit more about that than most people about it. Yeah.
Well, cost of living's cheaper where he's going to.
Listen. Good luck to him. Listen, he's got a kid. His wife's from the area. It makes perfect sense. He talked to me during the season about it, and I was like, absolutely. You know, I mean, I've got 2 kids. It's hard to raise kids in the city, and he's going back where his wife's family's from. It makes complete sense. So good luck to him. You know, no, I think just back to our coaches. Our coaches going into next season. It's just the players. You know, the players just want more recent and relevant coaching experience, and it's just a different game now. It's a different, I'd say, than when George was coaching, when Eddie was coaching. It's just these players are very, very needy, very, you know. So.
It's a slippery slope to go down that needy player path, isn't it?
Far be it be for me to suggest that the game is different. I put it to you, the game is no different now from it was 150 years ago. It is still dominated by that you can't win rugby without a number 9 and number 10. You can't win rugby without a scrum, and you can't win rugby without a line out. And the biggest mistake you can possibly make is have the players choose the coaches. But I've been very interested in Mr. Kennedy. I've studied his writings and his speaking. But Mr. Kennedy has made some interesting statements on podcast, for instance. He said he went to Buffalo, and the one thing that happened to him when he went to Buffalo is all these people came up to him and said, look, we want to be better coaches. Teach us to be better coaches. In 1995, USA Rugby was training 1,000 coaches a year at locations as diverse as San Diego, California, Dubuque, Iowa, Lawrence, Kansas, and Manchester, New Hampshire. The results that USA had to do with this was they sacked the chairman of the National Coaching Committee, they sacked the sponsor, and they sacked the guy who was delivering the programs around America. Net result is you have the kind of stories issuing from Buffalo that Mr. Kennedy so volubly and carefully enunciated, and I think it is a tragedy. American rugby, the problem for American rugby is that there is another game that is better funded, is more attractive to television, and is easier understood by your average American with a beer in his hand and a packet of paper chips.
You're talking about lacrosse, right? Lacrosse.
And that's sevens. And the day World Rugby put sevens into the Olympics, it signed the death warrant for 15s rugby. And we are watching the slow demise of 15s rugby. Well,
George, I completely disagree.
I disagree as well.
I'm here on the ground. You know, we've formed 2 clubs in the last 2 weeks and 3 clubs in the next 3 weeks, and the request to help form 15s clubs is off the charts. In the last data we have, not 2017, 1.62 million Americans put on rugby cleats, primarily in 15s. The tragedy is they're not registered with the US because the SIPT players in the US is about 120,000. And that's something we're actually working on with the help of technology and some incentives and call to actions to get those players registered. You register 1 million players, that fee goes to USA Rugby, and suddenly everything's rosy. But the interest in 15s and the growth of 15s has been phenomenal. You know, I can tell you it's we can't keep up. We literally can't keep up right now. And it's not just us, it's every team in the MLR. We talk about it all the time. It's us hiring more people like Simon to help us with that engagement and community. It's building and facilitating training fields and stadiums. And, you know, an owner asked me a couple of weeks ago, how do we get 60,000 people in a stadium for an MLR final? It's like we get 60,000 schools playing rugby. And the only problem we have, it's nothing to do with sevens. It's a lack of it's lack of fields. It's just fields.
It is specifically here in New York.
There's 169 15s high school programs in the New York metro area. 169. We could double that if we had the fields. So you know, in all respect, George, but that the sevens thing is not accurate. I'm not a big fan of sevens. Everybody knows that. But
I'm not a big fan. Hold on, Mr. Kennedy. This SIP registration. They were talking about the failure to register rugby players in USA Rugby 35 years ago. 35 years later, the failure to register players for SIP in USA Rugby is the same problem, and it is holding the game back because of lack of revenue. Two, high school programs are not like St. Michael's College or your beloved St. Munchin's or my beloved Presentation College Cork, where the game is part of the high school infrastructure. To this day, high school teams, so-called, are essentially outside mainstream high school rugby for a number of reasons. One, rugby presents massive insurance costs for high schools. Two, it increases coaching costs enormously because rugby is very demanding of coaching skills from a safety point of view. Three, if you look at every civilized nation on the globe playing rugby, there is a fall off of young people by age 21. And part of the reason is that the young people of today are different from the young people of the past. And they don't go on like I did until I was 40 years of age or whatever. So rugby around Blackrock College, the greatest rugby high school in the world, bar none. The Blackrock College club used to put 14 teams in the field. It now struggles to put 3 teams in the field.
But I gotta interrupt you here, George. I gotta interrupt you here, George, because I'm all over the place covering rugby. I am, and I can't lie to myself and try to convince myself of some false number or something that I am not seeing is realistic. And I'm seeing rugby growing in the United States. I am seeing, just since I started playing for the New York Rugby Club in 1987, the same year you were on Team USA's coaching staff in the first World Cup, what I have seen grow in terms of growth is mind-boggling. The fact that I was at a final that was completely sold out and not decided until the last minute in professional rugby that was on CBS here in the United States.
With a 0.7 rating.
With a 0.7 rating, and I'm watching all these kids playing rugby. Those numbers are different here. And I'm not disagreeing with you about the decline at Blackrock or why that's happening. But over here on the ground, we've got more rugby being played than ever, and it's quality rugby. Kids are getting.
Listen, if I can speak to a few points there, George, you made some really good points, and I agree in principle with most of them. I think I went to New Jersey High School Championships. I couldn't make the New York ones. I was traveling at the time, but our coaches went there. The quality's good, and there's teams out there playing good rugby with good coaches. Now, the coaches mostly don't get paid, and they do need help. The insurance is not we're not having the insurance issues that American football is having, and the litigation issues American football is having, but we will probably have them at some point. I think you talked about the fall off of rugby. Well, first of all, you talked about the SIP thing. Now, what's changed is there's now a professional league with soon to be 14 teams, and then soon to be very, very quickly thereafter 16 teams. It's not going anywhere. I can tell you with 100% certainty, this league is not going anywhere but forward. It behooves us as capitalists to get more people playing rugby. That's the difference between 35 years ago. That's the difference between 5 years ago. We now have money in the game all across the country. I've spent
and it's different than 3 years ago with the first iteration.
It's completely different.
One guy trying to do it all.
Now I've spent here in New York more than he spent in his season. And each individual owner has more or less spent around the same, some a little bit more, some a little bit lower. So there's tens of millions of dollars of private money going into rugby, and the only ROI is growing the game. And so that's different. The fall off. You're right about the fall off. I talked about it in France. I talked about it in Ireland. I've talked about it in the UK. Rugby is not pardon me. Rugby is not reaching the younger generation. We're being too goddamn boring about the game. We're not being irreverent. We're coming across, even in the working class neighborhoods, as elitist and one dimensional. I think if we change our attitude and be slightly more irreverent and be more personality, then and show them more the personality that we all have, I think we'll get those kids back. I think, how do you get the Comic Con generation to your games? This fall off, George, is every sport, because kids, they're happy to stay on their phones and play Fortnite and do all these things. And ironically, happy to spend $400 a month going to CrossFit. Yeah. When they can go to rugby for $90 a year. So you're right. But we now have a vehicle here, in MLR, we have a vehicle to address it, because it's in our financial interest to address it. It's not socialism, it's capitalism.
And to that point, about his point about capitalism, rugby for the most part globally has been of a socialist kind of economic model. You look at the NZRU dictating what happens in Super Rugby. That's not going to fly here in the United States. And I've always said the clash that's ultimately going to happen if you try to force that model. Okay, so if I win the lottery tomorrow and I go down and buy the Blues, and I'm just the figurehead, I'm just the Queen of England.
Ask Murray Bolton how that went.
Right, we've gone down that road.
Literally just talking to one of these guys out there before I came in here. So you ask Murray Bolton how that went.
No American fan is going to put up with somebody saying that their owner can't buy whom he wants.
I look, Mr. Kennedy is Irish, and therefore he's got my support from the beginning because of the country of his birth, and marginally from the city of his birth. But let me say this: in 1995, World Rugby declared the two sleeping giants that they would support totally because the future of the world game depended on those two sleeping giants. The two sleeping giants were China and the USA. You might, if you have the world rankings there, you might tell me where China are and where the USA are. And furthermore, you might tell me in sevens rugby, where does the USA rank? And the one thing that America likes is winners. And in seven-a-side rugby, for the obvious reason that it's not rugby, it bears as much resemblance to rugby union as Donald Trump does to FDR. But America is one of the major players in World Sevens, and it won't win a match in this World Cup.
Well, and that wouldn't necessarily be a failure because they are in a pool of death.
First of all, just a few of those things. So right now in Colorado, I'm blanking on Aspen. Sorry.
Take it easy. Get him some oxygen.
In Aspen, Colorado, right now, Rugby North America, which is World Rugby, is running a camp for U20s, crossover and skilled athletes. That's a 4-month, day in, day out, 5-day-a-week program to make these under 20 players elite athletes. They're doing the same for coaches in December. Simon will be going. They are actually now, once again, because there's money in the game. There's people on the ground that we can recommend players. We're in the roots. We're down in the weeds on this.
You're in Buffalo, for Christ's sake.
World Rugby doesn't have, USA Rugby doesn't have the ability, nor does any union really have the ability to get down a country of this size, to get down into the weeds and find out, the kid Jordan from Philly or Samu Smith or whoever it is. They just don't have the capability, nor will they ever, nor should they. So it's changing, George. It's changing right now. And you're right. All these issues are old issues. And the 90s, this happened. The 80s, this happened. In 2010, this happened. And RIM and all this kind of stuff. It's that all. None of that matters to me anymore because now we have people at the table that, as I said, it's in our financial interest to make this game better. And you're right. You're 100% right. The U.S. population only tolerates winners. So we have to make the national team better. I mean, look I can tell you, I'm back in Limerick in October, and I'm going to be going to high school and talking about who their players are, who their 15 and 16-year-olds are that I can bring to America and put in college because of the 5-year plan. And that's once the USA starts. I think I said it on a podcast or just last week. Once the USA, when they beat Scotland, it's not a surprise. It's just not a surprise. Then we're in a much better place.
When William Webb Ellis ran with the ball, America, was in covered wagons crossing to the west. However, in women's rugby, America brought women's rugby to the world. In 1991, they were champions of the world. Within 3 years, they were runners-up. Within another 4 years, they were nowhere, and they are nowhere today. Why? Because women's rugby has been banged up with gender politics rather than the game itself. And women's rugby in America should be market leaders. The New Zealand women did not enter the first World Cup because the ruling body says,
Kia ora, everyone.
Unless you prove to us that you're ready to go, we're not going to let you go. And who've won the World Cup the most times since then? New Zealand. And where are USA? Nowhere. Well, despite the country that brought the game to the world.
You make a good point. Mike Friday, the sevens coach for Team USA, would back you up and say that we should, in the U.S. at least, be using the women as a storefront or the shop front. But we got to move ahead because we are running out of time. So you were on the podcast that George was probably referring to was a good one. Your podcast with James Murren of USA Rugby News.
Yeah, good guy.
Yeah, good guy, good podcast. And what I found interesting about that is,
I can't believe you dropped the whole thing out there.
You were pretty tough on yourself.
Yeah,
you were very hard on yourself in that. And I just got to say, this guy, I don't know how well you know him, but you're crazy enough to have gotten this thing off the ground. Yeah. Where no one else did. That's number one. And number two, so you were tough on yourself. But let's talk, because the league's got changes going on. The league's got different things going on. It's a learning process. A couple of quick things that you think that you have to fix, or lessons that you learned.
It's like every business, finding the right people, staying on message, being more focused. Like getting Simon on board is an example of that. Putting more money into coaching. I honestly, I just didn't realize how underfunded our coaching staff was last year until I went to a practice towards the very end of the season. And I'm not the rugby guy, okay? So,
you need staff. You need help.
Having more of a engagement, like a more planned engagement with the community. Like last year, it was like I said yes to everything, every dinner, everything, and I wasted hundreds of thousands of dollars doing that stuff. If I could do it again, I'd put that hundreds of thousands of dollars into player welfare, because that's our product. They're my kids, but they're my product, right? So, I can say like the venue, we might be back there getting great guys, but obviously the location was an issue, and my ego got in the way. It was like, oh, we have to play in New York. We have to play in New York. We have to play in New York.
You mean in New York? In
the city.
Yeah,
in the city.
Yeah.
There's a reason.
It's
a reason the Giants, the Jets, and the Red Bulls don't play in New York City. You know? So my own ego, my own hubris, that's something I needed to address, and I need to continue addressing with people like James English and Simon around me, embedded in. Like, they're good at keeping me in check these days. And and I was told, the rugby community is fantastic, and I love you guys, but we're not going to survive in the back of just the rugby community. We need to get the non-rugby community into our stadiums as well. So lots to learn, lots to work on, but we're already a better machine now than we were obviously a year ago. We're way more on plan. We're way more clued in on who we are, what's our identity, what's our message. So. Yeah.
And how about on a league, the league office? You're going through changes. You've got stuff with your staff. You learned some lessons. Each team doing it. Are there changes in the league office? What's the broadcast thing going to be like? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, the broadcast thing. I'm in. So I can't actually talk specifics, but there's a lot of interest out there. It's a very good place to be in. There's a lot of suitors, specifically around the OTT space. So that's exciting, and it'll play out over the next month or so. The league office, we need a bigger league office. I think the guys are slightly overwhelmed. I think we're looking at doing a little bit of change at commissioner level. I think Dean is a fantastic person. It's part of a bigger plan that I can't really talk about, but it's all positive.
Will there be a paywall resulting in broadcast?
For OTT, there might be a very, very small paywall. So
there is one now for ESPN Plus.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. For OTT, if there is one,
and it's reasonable,
it'll be around the ESPN level.
Expansion. I've got rumors of LA, Vegas, San Francisco, and Chicago. Can you talk to any of that?
Well, we're going to announce the Dublin team in a couple of weeks.
And Hook is manager. And Hook is the director of rugby there.
I'm in Berlin tomorrow, so that's going to follow straight on. And then from there, it's the world.
Dublin, Berlin, and the world.
And the world.
All right. Okay.
There is exciting stuff about expansion coming on. It's once again, I said earlier when George was talking, this league's not going anywhere. There's more investors, more owners out there, more potential owners out there than there's any way we can expand reflective of player pool, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, expansion is great. The cities we're looking at are Chicago, San Francisco. Everybody knows it's Chicago, San Francisco, LA, and Vancouver. Will certainly be announcing one of those cities very soon.
Okay, all right, good.
And Dublin. Sorry, Mick Dawson.
Anything that we can announce, we can announce. But rivalries in that podcast, you called the Free Jacks Flapjacks.
Did I?
You want to retract that statement?
No,
it's not really, and it's really not that tough.
I know. It's a bit
flipjacks.
It's low hanging fruit, isn't it?
Flap Janes.
What do I say about DC?
You also said, which insulted me.
Drain the swamp.
Drain the
swamp. We're gonna go down and drain the swamp.
You lost me when you said interviewing rugby players is the most boring job in the world.
That was a quote from someone else. I was quoting someone else.
Oh, you quoting?
I love my rugby players. I love my rugby players.
The other James Kennedy.
The other James. Yeah. It's a very. Isn't he? Yeah. He's a.
You know what? If this is any example of interviewing somebody other than rugby players, this was pretty good. You guys have a little bit of a synergy. You and George, maybe a little talk show. All right, so Simon, where do you fit in all of this?
So my role is going to be the team manager role. So I'm going to be in charge of a lot of the logistics, getting the team from A to B.
Bus is here.
Another part of my role is going to be the assistant skills coach. So I'm going to be working with a lot of players one-on-one. I'm also working with the academy. Been working with Phil Tarigno, who did a fantastic job last year in our academy, and myself and him and James English are trying to create a structure.
Phil's the man. He wears great blazers.
Yeah,
he's got great blazers. But better than your blazers, Matt. I got to say,
it's hard to do.
I think to your point, George, earlier about USA not competing at an elite level. I think that because my experiences with the GA Gaelic Athletic Association over the last couple of years and working with New York specifically, And what we to do is to create a pathway for players to play in at elite level. So I think with our academy structure that we're hoping to put in place for over the next couple of years, that we want our players at under 18, under 20, under 23 level to be able to compete with Tier 1 nations. And I think until it starts at that level, the youth level, that it's going to be a lot harder to just automatically think that they're going to be able to compete at that level. Until we start competing all the way up in the rankings, then I don't think that we can realistically compete with the Tier 1, but it starts with our clubs and it's going to finish with the US national team, and that's my ambition, is to be a part of that.
And just so you know, Gary Gold, I'm back playing again, and I'm ready. I'm training tonight with Queen's Rugby Club, and I'm ready.
Get in line. I'll be.
I can be loose or tight. Yeah. I can cover back row. So I'm very, very utilitarian.
All right, so it's a good segue. So guys, I'm going to ask each one of you, because Team USA's roster, when it goes to Japan, will at least have half of the players with Major League Rugby experience. How are they going to fare in the World Cup? George, go first.
Won't win a match.
And will they be competitive?
Well, they've always been competitive, because the one thing Americans are is brave, and they're intensely physical, and they tackle like runaway trucks. But what they have never been ever is they've never been skillful enough, strategic enough to compete at the top level. And the real thing that people should be thinking about is soccer in America has a much longer tradition than rugby, and men's soccer can't beat anybody. The interesting thing is, in 8 World Cups, American women have won 4 of them, been runner-up 3 times and third once. They've never been out of the top 3 in 8 World Cups. American women could do the same thing for rugby. And we've got what I would give one piece of advice to Mr. Kennedy, who I admire his generosity of spirit massively. If you ignore history, you live to repeat it. And the history of USA rugby is littered with bad decisions.
But George, you're also ignoring history. The US rugby has 2 gold medals in 15s. USA Rugby played a very successful
1920 and 1924,
and they also played a very successful few years of college rugby when the American football was banned under Teddy Roosevelt brought it back. So there, you can go far back in history and find out history that suits every story.
That's right. In your face, Simon. In your face.
I don't think we have that. Does Ireland have any
Olympic gold medals for Ireland in rugby? All right.
I think, listen, I know a lot of guys going on that, and I know how good they are, and I know how better they've gotten. But geez, that group. If Ireland was in that group, I'd be tough.
No wins?
They'll beat one. They'll win one. Maybe even 2.
I think they're going to beat Tonga. That's my prediction, is they're going to beat Tonga.
I think they're going to beat Tonga. I think AJ McGinty's a fantastic out half, and I know that some of the Rooney lads that are going, they would make a lot of Tier 1 nation competitions. So they beat Samoa. They beat who's the other team they beat in the
Scotland.
PNC? Well, they beat Scotland last year, and then they were very competitive against a very good Japan team. So there's every reason I think for them to beat Tonga. And you've seen what England did to Ireland there over the weekend.
They had 8 potential starters on the bench versus Japan, by the way.
Right, so it wasn't there.
Not that Japan didn't do the same thing, but Team USA had a lot of players on the bench. You said out half, folks. For the folks at home, out half is another way of saying fly half.
Yeah, essentially the issue of the number 10 is Protestants call it fly half, Catholics call it out half. That's how you know.
Whoa, George. Jesus. There's no place for that. There's no place for that.
There certainly is place for that, and it's right here. Man. All right, gentlemen. On that note, we are out of time. I want to thank you for a very spirited and educational session here on Rugby Wrap Up. Mr. George Hook, Mr. James Kennedy, Mr. Simon Gillespie, on behalf of these gentlemen, I'm Matt McCarthy for Rugby Wrap-Up at the Fantasy Sports Network, Studio 34 in Midtown Manhattan. Talking Rugby, signing off.